The Graham Norton Show has hosted royalty, rock stars, and Hollywood legends. It has seen tears, laughter, confessions, and chaos. But nothing in its 25-year history prepared the studio audience for what happened on that red sofa on a Friday night that Britain will not forget. Two women, one sofa, opposite ends of the most divisive debate in modern British public life. On one side, Dame Helen Mirren, 80 years old, Oscar winner, Dame Commander of the British Empire, a woman who spent decades earning every single thing attached to her name. On the other side, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, the woman who married into the most scrutinized institution on the planet, left it under a storm of controversy, and has spent the years since telling the world exactly how terrible it was. You already sense where this is going, but you have no idea how far it actually went. Because what unfolded in that studio, live, unscripted, unfiltered, became one of the most watched, most debated, most jaw-dropping moments in British television history. By the time it was over, one woman had walked off the set. The other sat completely still, composed, unshaken. And the audience? They didn't breathe for 6 full minutes. Stay with us, because this is the moment the red sofa became a courtroom, and a verdict was delivered. Setting the scene. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters here. The Graham Norton Show, for anyone unfamiliar, is the crown jewel of British Friday night television. The red sofa is famous. Celebrities sit elbow to elbow, drinks in hand, in an atmosphere that feels relaxed, warm, conversational. Graham Norton is the master of making the uncomfortable feel comfortable. He is charm personified. Tonight's booking had generated unusual pre-show buzz. Dame Helen Mirren was promoting the BBC's Queen Elizabeth Centenary documentary, a project close to her heart, given her iconic portrayal of Elizabeth II in The Crown spin-off and, of course, her Oscar-winning turn in The Queen. Decades of studying one woman had made Helen something more than an actress who played a queen. It had made her, in many people's eyes, the closest thing to a civilian authority on Elizabeth's legacy. And then there was Meghan. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, had confirmed her appearance to discuss her ongoing advocacy work. Two other guests, a comedian and a musician, had been booked to round out the sofa. In any normal episode, they'd have had moments to shine. Not tonight. The moment the booking was announced, the British press went into overdrive. Helen Mirren and Meghan Markle on the same sofa? The woman who had devoted her career to honoring the Queen, and the woman widely seen as having dismantled her grandson's marriage to the monarchy, sitting side by side, in front of a live audience, with cameras rolling and nowhere to hide. Graham Norton reportedly joked in rehearsal that he'd need a referee. He wasn't entirely wrong. Helen arrived first. That detail matters. She came in warm, gracious, immediately at ease. The audience loved her from the first second. There was an authenticity to Helen Mirren that can't be manufactured. 50 years in the business teaches you how to walk into a room without performing. She settled into the sofa with the kind of relaxed confidence that only comes from having genuinely earned your seat. Meghan arrived minutes later, composed, immaculate, camera-aware in the way that has become her signature. She moved to the far end of the sofa, positioned herself carefully, beautiful, controlled, ready. Graham took his chair, glanced at both women, and delivered the understatement of the television season. This is going to be quite a show. He had absolutely no idea. The opening exchange. It began, as the most dangerous things often do, with something that sounded entirely innocent. Graham turned to Helen first. The BBC documentary, The Queen's Centenary, her decades of portraying Elizabeth, what had drawn her back to the subject? Helen's answer was warm and considered. Elizabeth would have been 100 this year, she noted. 100 years of life, 70 of them in service to a nation. She called it extraordinary. She called it a life devoted entirely to others, a concept she had come to not just respect, but genuinely admire through years of deep study. I learned that duty isn't a burden for some people, Helen said. It's an identity. She woke up every morning knowing her life wasn't her own, that her preferences, her desires, her personal feelings came second to the role. Most people can't imagine that level of sacrifice. Pause on that word. Sacrifice. Because it was that word, and everything it implied, that lit the fuse. From the opposite end of the sofa, Meghan spoke. Not everyone experiences the institution as sacrifice. Some experience it as a cage. The audience shifted. Slightly, collectively, perceptibly, that quiet rustling of people who have just felt a temperature change in a room. Helen turned, slowly, calmly, and looked directly at Meghan. Do they? I spent years studying that institution, reading about it, understanding its weight. What I found was complexity, not cruelty. Meghan held her composure. You studied it from the outside. I lived it from the inside. For 3 years, Helen replied, measured, even. I studied it for decades. Respectfully, observation and participation offer different perspectives, but duration provides depth. Now, let's stop here for just a moment, because what just happened in those 30 seconds was not an accident, and it was not small. Helen Mirren had just drawn a line in the sand with the precision of someone who had chosen every word deliberately. She wasn't attacking, she wasn't ranting, she was dismantling, methodically, patiently, with the confidence of someone who has nothing to prove and everything already proven. Graham attempted a light pivot. Well, we've got both perspectives right here on the sofa. Neither woman laughed. Neither woman moved. And then Helen asked the first question that made the studio fall genuinely quiet. The institution you describe as a cage, it's the same one that gave you a global platform, the same one that elevated you from actress to duchess, the same one whose name you still carry. How do you reconcile criticizing something while continuing to benefit from it? There it was. And how did Meghan respond? She said, I earned my place through my marriage. Now think about that answer for a second. Really think about it. Because in attempting to defend herself, Meghan had inadvertently confirmed the exact point Helen was making. Through her marriage, not through her work, not through independent achievement, through a marriage to a prince, into the very institution she was describing as a cage. Helen heard it immediately. The audience heard it a beat later. And what followed was one of the most devastatingly quiet dissections you will ever see delivered in a television studio. The dismantling. Your marriage to a prince, Helen said, her voice never once rising above a conversational level. And that, right there, is what made it so powerful. Your marriage to a prince made you part of the institution you now criticize. The title you hold, Duchess of Sussex, was granted by that institution. The recognition that allows you to sit on this sofa tonight came from that institution. Meghan replied that she had built her own platform since leaving. Have you? Helen asked. 2 words, no heat, no malice, just the quiet weight of a question that already contained its own answer. The Netflix deal came because you were a duchess. The book deal came because you were a duchess. The speaking engagements come because you were a duchess. Strip away the royal connection, and what remains? Now ask yourself honestly, and this matters, because it's the question millions of people watching that night were asking themselves simultaneously. Could you answer that question? If you were Meghan Markle in that moment, sitting under studio lights in front of a live audience with cameras broadcasting to the nation, what would your answer be? Meghan didn't answer. Not substantively. And the silence that followed was not a comfortable pause. It was an absence, a void where an answer should have lived. Graham tried to redirect. Helen declined the redirect. I've spent my career earning recognition, Helen said. 50 years, hundreds of roles. Every award, every accolade came through work. The damehood came after decades of contribution. What have you earned that didn't flow from marriage? Meghan's composure held, but only just. You could see it. The slight flush, the controlled breathing, the very deliberate steadiness of someone working hard to maintain a surface that was threatening to crack. "I was successful before Harry," she said. Helen's response was immediate and precise. "You were a working actress, respectable, but not globally famous, not sitting on talk shows discussing global issues. That came after. Be honest about the sequence." And then she went further. Archewell, Meghan's foundation, the centerpiece of what she had described as her independent post-royal work, came under examination next. "I've looked," Helen said. "Beautiful website, inspiring language. When I search for outcomes, lives changed, policies influenced, measurable impact, I find nothing." This is the moment the studio went from uncomfortable to stunned. Because Helen Mirren had just done the thing that most interviewers, most public figures, most people in polite company refused to do. She had asked for the receipts, quietly, specifically, and with the precision of someone who had clearly done the homework. What had Archewell actually produced? Not in terms of elegant mission statements or carefully crafted announcements, but in terms of tangible, verifiable, documented outcomes. Meghan didn't answer that question either. The breaking point. And then Meghan said something that changed the temperature of the entire room. "I won't be interrogated by an actress." Helen's response came back instantly, calm, precise, and carrying the kind of force that only quiet certainty can deliver. An actress who won an Oscar playing the grandmother you now criticize constantly. An actress who studied your family history more thoroughly than you apparently lived it. An actress who earned her title through work, not marriage. The audience reaction in that moment was something beyond applause. It was the intake of breath of people who have just witnessed something they did not expect to witness. Something real. Something that cut through the usual carefully rehearsed softness of celebrity television and arrived, unannounced, in the territory of genuine confrontation. And then Helen shifted again, because she wasn't finished. She raised the matter of Peter Philip's wedding the previous weekend, Prince Harry's cousin, a family event that multiple sources had confirmed Meghan did not attend because she had not been invited. The family, reports stated, had specifically excluded her to avoid what one source described as a PR circus. "How does it feel," Helen asked, "to be characterized as a circus?" Meghan called it tabloid nonsense. Helen was ready for that too. Multiple sources, confirmed reports. The family didn't want you there. Not the media, the family. Your own family by marriage. What does that tell you? Meghan's answer: "It tells me the institution remains hostile." And Helen, calmly, quietly, without raising her voice even slightly, delivered the response that stopped the room. "Or it tells you that your behavior has consequences. That publishing intimate family details for profit damages relationships. That doing Netflix documentaries criticizing your in-laws might affect your welcome at family events." Now pause on that for a moment. Because that is not a cruel observation. That is not an attack. That is a straightforward application of cause and effect. Actions, public actions, commercially motivated actions, have consequences in personal relationships. That is not a controversial statement. That is simply true. And its truth is exactly what made it so difficult to sit with. Graham, by this point, had given up any pretense of controlling the conversation. He gripped his cards. He looked between the two women. He attempted an intervention. He was ignored. Helen pressed forward with the question that shattered what remained of the composure in that studio. "When you married Harry, what did you think would happen? That the institution would reform to suit you? That centuries of protocol would bend to your preferences? That a family you just joined would immediately prioritize your comfort?" Meghan said she had expected basic decency. Helen listed what Meghan had received: a wedding that cost £32 million, global recognition, a title, a home, staff, protection. What basic decency was denied? The press treatment, Meghan said. The media, the way she had been covered. And here Here is where Helen Mirren said something that landed with the quiet devastation of an observation that is impossible to argue with. The press treats everyone badly. They treated Diana badly. They treated Camilla badly. They treated Kate badly for years. The treatment wasn't unique to you. What was unique was your response. The Oprah interview wasn't free. The Netflix deal wasn't charity. The book earned millions. You've monetized your grievances more successfully than anyone in royal history. That's not honesty. That's commerce. And there it was. 14 words that defined the entire argument in a way that no amount of counter-argument could undo. That's not honesty. That's commerce. The exit and aftermath. Meghan reached for her purse. It was the gesture of someone who has calculated that staying in this conversation is more damaging than leaving it. And perhaps she was right about that. But leaving had its own cost. "You don't understand what I experienced," she said. Helen's reply came without a moment's hesitation. "I understand what you've shown. Interview after interview about your suffering. Documentary after documentary about your pain. A book detailing private family conversations. What you've shown is someone who profits from conflict while claiming to want peace." "I want peace," Meghan said. "Do you?" Helen asked, and her voice for just a moment carried something that sounded less like prosecution and more like genuine sorrow. "Because peace would require silence. Peace would require not doing interviews. Peace would require letting wounds heal privately. Instead, every few months, another revelation, another accusation, another monetized grievance." And then came the question that nobody in that studio was prepared for. The question that landed not like an attack, but like a mirror held up at an angle nobody expected. Helen leaned forward. She looked directly at Meghan. "Do you believe you're wanted anywhere? By the royal family? By the British public? By the American establishment that hasn't embraced you either? Who wants you?" The silence that followed was the longest of the entire evening, not because Meghan had no response, but because the question had reached past her defenses and touched something that no answer could comfortably address. She said, "I'm wanted by millions." Helen nodded slowly. "Millions who consume your content. That's not the same as being wanted. That's being watched. Being wanted means being invited, being included, being missed when absent. Who misses you? Who invites you? Who wants you present rather than performing?" The answer Meghan gave, her husband, allowed Helen to deliver the most personal observation of the entire exchange. Reports that Harry wished to return to England while Meghan did not. Reports of Harry increasingly attending events alone. Reports of a marriage navigating the gravitational pull between two worlds that had never fully aligned. "Is he evidence of being wanted?" Helen said quietly. "Or evidence of partnership strain?" Meghan stood. She grabbed her purse fully now, and she said the line that, in retrospect, was the most self-defeating thing she could possibly have said in that moment. "I won't sit here and be attacked by someone who played my husband's grandmother in a movie and thinks that gives her authority." Helen smiled. Not with triumph, with something sadder than that. "I played her because I studied her, because I respected her enough to understand her, because I saw what service actually looks like. What I see in you is the opposite. Not service, self-promotion. Not sacrifice, strategy. Not belonging, performing. You never understood what you married into, and now you criticize what you never grasped." Meghan walked toward the exit. "This is outrageous. You've joined everyone who wants to tear me down." "I've joined observation," Helen said, not moving from her seat, not raising her voice. "What I observe is someone who entered an institution without understanding it, left that institution while profiting from it, and spends her time criticizing that institution while still using its name and recognition. That's not a victim. That's an opportunist." One final exchange, and then Meghan was gone. The studio door closed, and the red sofa sat in a silence that lasted several full seconds, the kind of silence that only falls when a room full of people has collectively witnessed something it doesn't quite have words for yet. Graham Norton stared at his cards, looked at the remaining guests, looked at the audience. "Well," he said, "that just happened." Helen's final statement. Helen smoothed her sleeve, completely calm, completely composed. The kind of composure that isn't performed, it's accumulated. 50 years of navigating difficult directors, difficult roles, difficult rooms. This was nothing she hadn't handled before, just in a different setting. "I apologize for the disruption. I didn't intend to dominate the conversation." Graham, to his credit, replied, "You didn't dominate. You clarified." The comedian on the sofa, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. "That was, I've got nothing. I've got no jokes that follow that." Helen laughed. Genuine. Warm. The tension, for the first time in 40 minutes, broke slightly at the edges. The audience exhaled collectively, the way people do when they've been holding themselves rigid through something they weren't prepared for and are only now remembering how to breathe normally. But before Graham could pivot to lighter material, Helen asked to say one more thing, directly to camera, directly to the audience watching at home. Graham nodded. Nobody in that studio was going to stop her. Nobody wanted to. She said, "I was raised anti-monarchist. My parents would have been horrified that I played the Queen. But through studying Elizabeth II, through really trying to understand her, I came to respect something I'd dismissed, the weight of duty, the sacrifice of self, the quiet endurance of a woman who gave her entire life to service." She paused. The studio was completely silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a punchline. The deep, genuine silence of people who have just heard something true spoken out loud. What I witnessed tonight was the opposite. Someone who received enormous gifts from that institution, recognition, platform, global fame, and has spent years complaining about how those gifts were wrapped. That's not courage, that's ingratitude, and someone needed to say it. The audience applauded, not wildly, not with the whooping energy of a game show win. Slowly, heavily, the applause of people who had been through something and were only just starting to process it. The kind of applause that means yes rather than bravo. The musician on the sofa, quiet all evening, said softly, "My grandmother watched the Queen on television every Christmas. She'd be glad someone defended her." "That's who I was thinking of," Helen said. "The people who loved the Queen, who saw in her something worth admiring, who watch her family get attacked and feel helpless to respond. I responded for them." Aftermath and analysis. The footage aired that night. The BBC made no edits. Not a single cut, not a single softened moment, not a single diplomatic trim. What the studio audience witnessed, the nation witnessed in full. By morning, the clips had spread to every corner of the internet. The phrases that dominated social media were not complex or philosophical. They were the simple surgical lines that Helen had delivered with such quiet certainty. Strip away the royal connection, and what remains? An actress who earned her title through work, not marriage. Your behavior has consequences. You've monetized your grievances more successfully than anyone in royal history. Your sacrifice looks remarkably like lateral movement with improved weather. Someone who took what the institution offered and gave nothing but criticism in return. Meghan's team released a statement characterizing the appearance as a coordinated ambush, carefully planned, institutionally motivated, designed to humiliate rather than engage. Helen's response, delivered through her representatives, was characteristically precise. Coordinated? I spoke spontaneously from decades of study and observation. The ambush she describes is simply someone who earned the right to speak about the monarchy through years of respectful engagement, asking questions of someone who has earned nothing but profit from complaint. She added one final line that circulated as widely as anything from the interview itself. I've played the Queen, I've met the Queen, I've studied the Queen. When someone attacks that legacy while benefiting from it, I notice. And at 80 years old, I have nothing to lose by noticing out loud. Nothing to lose. That is the phrase that explains everything about why Helen Mirren was able to do what she did that night. She had no brand to protect beyond the one she'd already built across 5 decades. She had no career trajectory to worry about. She had no PR calculation to make, no algorithm to satisfy, no deal to protect. She was 80 years old, a dame, an Oscar winner, and someone who had come to love Elizabeth II not through accident of birth or marriage, but through the deliberate, painstaking work of study. When someone like that decides to speak, you hear it differently. There is a weight to it that PR statements cannot replicate, and that no amount of media training can manufacture. It carries the particular gravity of someone who has spent a lifetime choosing their battles carefully, and has finally chosen one worth fighting. So what did that red sofa actually reveal? It revealed the difference between earned authority and assumed authority, between a title that arrives after decades of contribution and a title that arrives on a wedding day, between someone who has spent 50 years building something and someone who entered a centuries-old institution for 3 years and left with a Netflix deal. Helen asked what Meghan had built. Meghan couldn't answer. Helen asked if Meghan was wanted anywhere. Meghan couldn't respond. Helen asked what sacrifice actually looked like. Meghan provided nothing. And in that silence, that devastating, impossible to ignore silence where achievement should have been, the contrast between the two women became undeniable. Not because Helen was cruel, not because Helen was wrong, but because the questions she asked were the questions that everybody watching already knew the answers to. The questions that had been sitting in living rooms across Britain for years, unasked, unanswered, waiting for someone with enough standing and enough nerve to finally give them voice. Some people spend their entire lives earning their place. They wake up early and work late and take the bad roles and the difficult projects and the unglamorous years because they understand that respect is not a thing that can be demanded. It is a thing that must be built, brick by brick, year by year, role by role. Helen Mirren is that person. 50 years of work, an Oscar, a damehood, and the authority that comes from having genuinely tried to understand something rather than simply passing through it. And then there is the other kind. The kind that arrives late, receives much, stays briefly, and leaves with grievances carefully packaged for maximum commercial return. The kind that confuses a platform built on someone else's legacy with a platform built on their own. The red sofa saw both kinds on the same night. And the audience, every single person in that studio, every viewer who watched at home, every person who shared those clips the next morning, knew exactly what they had witnessed. Helen earned everything. The silence told the rest of the story.